The rain fell hard on the metal roof of the outpost, turning the night into a steady drum of noise inside the dim command room. Jack sat with his boots on the table, staring at the flickering light above. He had been on dangerous missions before, but nothing could prepare him for what the commander was about to say. "You and Mason are assigned to escort someone through enemy territory," the commander said, sliding a thin data tablet across the desk. Jack picked it up, reading the brief order, then froze. This is it. No details. No intel. Mason leaned on the wall, arms crossed. "Why us? We're not babysitters." The commander's voice dropped low. "She's important. More important than either of you can imagine. You must protect her at all costs." Jack frowned. She. The door at the far end of the room opened, and in stepped a young alien girl, maybe 17 in human years. Her skin shimmered faintly under the cold lights, a mix of pale silver and blue, her eyes sharp and watchful. "This is Lyra," the commander said. "If you fail, the war may be lost." Jack exchanged a quick look with Mason, both thinking the same thing. This was trouble. Lyra didn't speak, she only glanced at them. Then at the pack slung over her shoulder. The pack looked heavy, and she kept one hand on it like it was her lifeline. "When do we leave?" Jack asked. "Now?" The commander replied without hesitation. "The longer you stay here, the more danger you invite." Moments later, they were outside in the cold night, walking quickly across the landing pad toward a small transport vehicle. Lyra kept her distance, walking behind them, her gaze scanning every shadow. Jack noticed her boots barely made a sound. Even on metal, they drove out of the outpost. The engines low and quiet, heading into the dark hills beyond. No one spoke for a long time, the silence heavy with questions. Finally, Mason broke it. "What's in the bag?" Lyra's voice was calm but firm. "Something they must never have." "Who's they?" Jack asked. "The ones already following us," she said, without turning her head. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Following us?" "Two bikes, keeping distance, one with a long-range scanner," she replied, still watching the darkness. Mason checked the rearview mirror, and, sure enough, two faint lights flickered in the far distance. Jack's hand moved to his rifle. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "I just did," Lyra said simply. They drove faster, the hills turning into dense forest, the shadows deeper and thicker. The two bikes behind them gained speed, the faint hum of their engines now reaching human ears. Jack tapped Mason's shoulder. "Off-road." Now, the vehicle jolted as they turned sharply onto a narrow dirt path. Branches scraping the sides. "Hang on," Mason muttered, wrestling the controls as the path twisted sharply. Suddenly, a flash of light tore through the trees, a shot from the pursuers. It missed, but the sound was enough to make Lyra crouch. Low hand still gripping her pack. "They won't stop," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "If they catch me, they'll kill you first." Jack didn't like the sound of that. They drove hard until the path ended at a rocky slope. The vehicle could go no further out, Jack ordered, grabbing his gear. They scrambled into the forest on foot. Moving fast, the sound of the bikes grew louder. The enemy closed behind. They reached a small clearing, moonlight spilling over. Wet grass. Jack took position behind a fallen log. Mason crouched beside a tree. "Stay down," Jack told Lyra, but she didn't listen. Instead, she moved to the edge of the clearing, pulling a small device from her belt. "What are you doing?" Mason hissed. "Ending this," she said. Pressing a button, the device hummed, and a pulse of blue light swept through the trees. The bikes behind them sputtered and died, their engines silenced. The riders stumbled off, but before they could recover, Lyra dashed forward with impossible speed. Jack and Mason barely saw her move. One moment, she was beside them. The next, she was behind the enemy. A quick strike, a flash of light, and both attackers were on the ground, unconscious. She returned calmly, slipping the device back into her belt. Jack stared at her. What the hell was that? Teamwork, she said, with a faint smile. And we're just getting started. The forest fell silent again, except for the sound of distant thunder. Jack and Mason exchanged another look. This mission was going to be nothing like they imagined, and deep down, they both knew they might not all make it back alive. The forest was darker now, clouds swallowing the moonlight, making every shadow look alive. Jack moved first, keeping his rifle ready. Mason followed close behind, his limp barely noticeable from the earlier sprint. Lyra walked in the middle this time, silent as a ghost, her pack still clutched tight. The air smelled of wet leaves and smoke. Somewhere far off a fire burned. No one spoke for almost an hour. Only the sound of their boots on damp soil. Jack finally broke the silence, asking where. She learned to move like that. Lyra didn't look at him, just said, "You don't survive in my world without learning." Mason glanced at Jack, but neither pushed for more answers. Something about the way she said it felt heavier than any explanation. They stopped near a shallow stream. Jack crouched to fill his canteen. Mason scanned the tree line. Lyra stayed still, eyes closed. Then she whispered, "Two groups approaching. One to our left, one behind." Jack froze. Mason swore under his breath. "How do you know?" She opened her eyes. "I can hear there comes your ears, can't." Jack motioned for everyone to move. They took a narrow animal trail that climbed uphill, hoping to gain some advantage. Rain began again, soft at first, then harder, making the ground slippery. They kept climbing until the forest thinned, revealing a broken fence and an old structure half buried under vines. "This is the place," Lyra said suddenly. Jack frowned. "What place?" She didn't answer, just walked toward the doorway. Mason stopped her. "We don't even know what's in there." Lyra's eyes flashed in the dark. "What's in there can save you." Without waiting, she slipped inside. Jack followed. The air inside was cold and metallic. The walls were covered with panels that hummed faintly. Mason closed the door behind them, sealing out the rain. Lyra moved straight to a console in the corner and began tapping on it. Jack stepped closer. "You've been here before." It wasn't a question. She nodded. "This is an old relay station, if I can bring it online. I can disrupt their tracking before." Jack could reply. A sharp alarm filled the room. Mason drew his weapon. "What did you do?" Lyra's hands flew over the controls. "They know we're here. I only have seconds." The lights above flickered, then shifted to a deep red glow outside. Movement could be heard. Boots crunching through wet leaves. Jack took position. By the window, Mason covered the door. Lyra pulled a small cube from her pack and pressed it into Jack's hand. "If I don't make it, you take this to your command." Jack stared at it. "Feeling its strange warmth? You're talking like you're not coming with us." She met his eyes, her voice steady. "I might not." The first shadow moved past the window. Jack fired. Mason joined in. Lyra stayed at the console, her fingers moving faster. The station trembled as power surged. A sharp crack filled the air as the front door burst open. Enemy soldiers flooding in. Jack fought to push them back. Mason gritted his teeth as one got close enough for hand-to-hand. Then the humming in the walls grew louder, and with a sudden burst, every device the enemy carried went dead. Weapons, comms, scanners, all useless. The soldiers hesitated in confusion, and Lyra shouted, "Now!" Jack and Mason didn't need telling twice. They hit hard, driving the enemy out into the rain. When the last one was gone, Lyra collapsed against the console. Breathing heavily, Jack rushed over. "You all right?" She nodded weakly. "The relay is burned out. They won't track us for a while." Mason looked at the doorway. Water dripping from his hair. "Then we move." before they regroup. They stepped back into the storm, the forest swallowing them again. Jack glanced at Lyra, walking between them, this time a little closer. He didn't know what was in her pack. But he knew now it was worth bleeding for, and somewhere inside, it was starting to believe her when she said she could save them. The rain had slowed to a mist, clinging to their clothes and hair. But the forest floor was slick and dangerous. Jack led the way, scanning every tree trunk. Every patch of shadow, Mason walked behind, his breathing steady but his eyes sharp. Lyra stayed in the middle again, but this time her head was constantly turning. As if measuring the air itself, they'd been moving for hours without a single sign of pursuit, which worried Jack more than constant attacks. He knew the enemy wasn't just gone, they were planning something. Lyra suddenly stopped, one hand raised. Jack froze mid-step. Mason shifted his weight silently. Waiting for her signal, she pointed at a patch of ground ahead. "Don't step there." Jack looked closely, but saw nothing, just wet leaves and mud. Lyra crouched and brushed them aside, revealing a thin mesh of alien metal glinting faintly in the dim light. "Pressure trigger," she said quietly. "Step on it, and the whole ridge comes down." Mason's brow furrowed. "A landslide trap, out here." Lyra nodded. "They know we'd take this route." They skirted the trap carefully. But as they passed, a faint click echoed from deeper in the forest. Lyra's eyes widened. "They're already setting off the next one." The ground trembled. Under their feet, Jack grabbed Lyra and pushed her forward as a wall of dirt and stone roared down the slope behind them. Mason barely made it out of the way in time. They ran until the sound faded, stopping in a small gully where the rain pooled. Into shallow water, Jack turned to Lyra. "You keep knowing things before they happen." "How?" She hesitated, her gaze flicking between them. "Because I was trained to fight them, not run from them." Mason gave a short, dry laugh. "Guess that makes three of us." A faint metallic chirp cut the moment short. Jack's instincts kicked in. He ducked low just as a dart zipped past where his head had been, embedding itself in a tree with a faint hiss. Lyra dropped to one knee. Pulling a compact weapon from her belt, Mason already had his rifle up, scanning the rocks above, too. Enemy scouts appeared on the ridge, moving fast and quiet. Jack fired, forcing them to take cover. Lyra rolled to a better position and shot a burst of light that burned into the rock, making one scout slip. Mason's voice was calm but urgent. "They're just testing us. More are coming." They pushed forward, weaving through the gully, until it opened into a clearing. At the center stood an old transport, half buried in moss and vines. "This is our way out," Lyra said, hurrying toward it. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Does it even work?" She didn't answer, just started tearing open a side panel and yanking out bundles of cable. Mason took position near the edge of the clearing. 3 minutes, he said. "After that, we'll have company." Lyra's hands moved fast, sparks flying as she rerouted power lines. Jack covered her side, every muscle tense. The sound of boots splashing through water grew closer. A shadow broke from the trees, and Jack fired without hesitation. More movement followed, flashes of enemy armor. Between the branches, Lyra slammed the panel shut and shouted, "Get in." The transport's lights flickered, then flared bright. The hatch creaked open, and they piled inside. The engines roared weakly, then caught, sending the old craft lurching forward. Mason strapped in, eyes scanning the tree line as shapes burst. From it, chasing them, Jack braced himself against the wall, watching Lyra fight the controls like she'd flown it 100 times before. The clearing vanished behind them, swallowed by the dark forest. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't escape. It was just the next stage of whatever game they'd been thrown into. And from the way Lyra's jaw was set, she already knew exactly where that stage would be. The transport rattled like it would fall apart at any second. The old frame groaning with every jolt, Jack gripped the side rail, keeping his balance as Lyra pushed the controls to their limits. Mason sat at the rear hatch with his rifle. Scanning the dark sky, "We've got flyers," he called out. Jack moved beside him, spotting faint blue lights weaving between the clouds. "Moving fast." Lyra's voice was steady but tight. "Hold them off. I can't outfly them in this junk." The first enemy craft dropped low, firing a burst of plasma that scorched the transport's hull. The smell of burnt metal filled the cabin. Mason leaned out and took a clean shot. The blast hitting one of the flyer's engines. It spiraled away in smoke, but two more took its place. Jack loaded his rifle, his shots forcing the others to scatter. "They're not trying to kill us," Lyra said suddenly. "They're trying to hurt us." Mason's jaw tightened. "Hurt us where?" She didn't answer, just pushed the transport into a sharp dive. The world outside became a blur of trees and rock as they skimmed the ridge. Branches whipping past the windows. The enemy flyers stayed on their tail, one swinging wide to cut. "Them off," Jack steadied himself, aimed and fired at its wing. Sparks flew, but the craft held steady. A warning light flashed on Lyra's console. "Rear stabilizer is failing," she said. "Mason, get to the engine bay. Reroute power from the vent systems." Mason didn't hesitate. Vanishing into the back of the transport, the second he was gone, the lead enemy craft surged forward, lining up for a disabling shot. Jack saw it and fired again, his blast hitting just enough to make it veer away. Mason's voice came over the cum from the rear. "Power's shifting. You've got 20 more seconds of full thrust. Use it." Lyra grinned faintly and slammed the throttle. The transport shot forward like a freed arrow, skimming so close to the trees that Jack felt the leaves scrape the hull. The enemy gave chase, but Lyra twisted them into a narrow canyon where the walls were barely wider than the transport. "Hold on," she warned, weaving between jagged stone as plasma fire lit up the canyon walls. Jack covered the left, Mason the right, their shots striking fast enough to keep the enemy cautious. One flyer got too close on Jack's side. He didn't have a clear shot, but Mason leaned over and fired in one perfect burst, sending it spinning into the canyon wall. The explosion lit the cockpit in blue fire. Lyra swung hard out of the canyon mouth, the last remaining pursuer still on there. "Tail, Jack, the top hatch," she shouted without thinking. He climbed the ladder, bracing himself against the wind as he emerged into the night. The enemy flyer rose to meet him, too close for a safe shot. Jack waited until the very last moment before firing directly into its cockpit. The craft lurched violently and fell from the sky. Disappearing into the dark, Jack dropped back inside, catching his breath. Lyra slowed the transport slightly, her shoulders relaxing. "Nice work," she said. Mason chuckled from the rear. "Guess that's what happens when we actually work together." Jack smirked. "Yeah, teamwork." But even as they caught their breath, Lyra's eyes stayed on the horizon. "We're not done yet," she said quietly. "They'll send more, and next time, they'll bring the big ones." Jack and Mason exchanged a glance, neither liking the sound of that, but both ready for whatever was coming. The transport groaned as it settled onto a rocky plateau. The engines hissing in the cold night air, Jack stepped out first, rifle ready. Scanning the jagged horizon, Mason followed, stretching his arms after hours of cramped flying. Lyra came last, still clutching her pack. Her gaze locked on the stars above as if reading some invisible map. The wind cut sharp through the plateau, carrying the faint echo of distant engines. Jack heard it too, but softer than before. He knew they didn't have much time. Lyra moved to the edge of the rocks and knelt. Placing her pack gently in front of her, for the first time, she unlatched it. Inside wasn't food or weapons or supplies. It was a strange sphere, black and smooth. its surface alive with faint, shifting patterns like liquid shadows. Jack stepped closer. "What is that?" Lyra didn't look up. "The heart of my people." Mason frowned. "You're gonna have to be a little more clear than that," she sighed, finally meeting their eyes. "It's a core crystal from my world, the last one, if it's destroyed. My people die forever. No rebirth, no future." Jack's jaw tightened. "So they're chasing you for that?" She shook her head slowly. "No. They're chasing me because I can use it." The wind grew louder, almost hiding her next words. "This crystal can trigger a weapon buried beneath my home-world's surface. It can end this war in a single strike, but it can also burn half the galaxy if it's in the wrong hands." Mason cursed under his breath. "And you're just carrying it around like it's nothing?" She closed the pack again, locking the straps. "Because I trust you more than anyone else alive right now." Jack exchanged a look with Mason, neither saying what they were both thinking. They hadn't signed up for galaxy-ending stakes. Before he could speak, a faint red light swept over the rocks. Lyra's expression hardened. "They found us." A low hum grew in the air, followed by the silhouette of 3 enemy dropships rising over the cliffs, their searchlights stabbing through the darkness. Mason slung his rifle and checked his ammo. 3 ships, each with at least 20 soldiers. That's 60 against 3. Jack gave a dry smile. "Sounds fair." Lyra stood between them, her voice calm. "If we split, they'll get the crystal. If we stay, we might all die." Jack looked at her, then at Mason. "We're staying." Mason nodded once. "Yeah, we're staying." The dropships closed in, engines roaring, and for a brief moment all 3 stood shoulder to shoulder. The cold wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. Whatever happened next, none of them would run. The first dropship came in low, its searchlights sweeping across the plateau. Jack fired first, the shot sparking off the cockpit glass. Mason dropped to one knee and picked off a soldier before he even hit the ground. Lyra stayed still for a moment, eyes closed, her fingers brushing the side of her pack as if feeling the crystal's pulse. Then she moved fast, pulling out a thin rod from her belt and slamming it into the rocky ground. A ripple of blue energy spread outward, distorting the air. The first wave of enemy fire went wide. Their targeting scrambled. Jack shouted over the roar of engines. "Nice trick. How long does it last?" Lyra didn't answer, which told him all he needed to know. The second dropship landed farther back, troops spilling out in tight formation. Mason shifted fire, hitting one after another. But there were too many. Jack moved closer to Lyra, covering her as she pulled a small device from her belt and tossed it toward the advancing soldiers. It hit the ground and exploded in a blinding flash, the shockwave knocking several of them off their feet. The third dropship circled overhead, its guns spitting fire into the plateau. Jack dove behind a boulder. Mason rolled into cover beside him. "They're trying to pin us down," Mason yelled. Lyra crawled over, her face lit by the pale glow of the crystal inside her pack. "We can't win by just shooting. I need to reach their command ship." Jack glanced at the ships above. "And how exactly do you plan on doing that?" She held up the crystal, its surface swirling faster now. "I connect this directly to their control system. It'll fry every circuit they have." Mason stared at her. "That'll also make you the biggest target out here." She met his eyes, calm but unshaken. "Then you'd better cover me." They broke cover together, Jack and Mason firing in short, sharp bursts, driving the enemy back just enough for Lyra to run. She moved like a shadow between the searchlights, every step taking her closer to the largest dropship. Mason took a hit to the shoulder, but kept firing, his teeth clenched against the pain. Jack heard the deep whine of the ship's cannons powering up and knew they had seconds. He sprinted forward, firing until his rifle clicked empty, tossing it aside and drawing his sidearm. The noise, the smoke, the flashes of light, all of it blurred together until he saw Lyra reach the dropship's landing strut. She leaped, caught hold, and climbed, enemy fire sparking around her. Jack and Mason laid down everything they had left the moment she disappeared into the belly of the ship. Jack's heart pounded harder, not knowing if she'd make it back. Then the sky lit up, a surge of white-blue light flooding across every ship. The engines screamed, weapons went dead, and soldiers dropped to their knees as their gear failed. The entire enemy force went silent. The dropship doors opened, and Lyra stepped out, the crystal dim in her hands. Her chest rose and fell fast, but she was smiling. Jack and Mason ran to meet her, Mason shaking his head in disbelief. "You're insane," Jack smirked. "Yeah." But it worked. The wind howled over the empty plateau, carrying away the last echoes of battle. None of them said it out loud, but they all knew they'd just pulled off the impossible. The plateau was quiet now. Only the faint hiss of cooling metal from the dead dropships breaking the silence. Jack sat on a rock, reloading slowly, every muscle aching. Mason was beside him, wrapping a makeshift bandage around his shoulder. Lyra stood a little apart, the crystal cradled in her hands, its glow faint but steady. Dawn began to creep over the horizon, turning the clouds gold and silver. Jack watched it for a moment, then looked at Lyra. "So, what happens now?" She didn't answer right away, just stared at the crystal as if weighing it. "Now," she said finally, "we take this to my people, and we end this war for good." Mason gave a tired laugh. "You make it sound so simple." A distant hum grew louder, but this time it wasn't enemy ships, it was friendly transports. Sleek and unarmed, sweeping in over the cliffs. Jack stood as one landed nearby. Soldiers spilling out to secure the area. Their commander approached, eyes wide as he saw Lyra. "We thought you were dead," he said. She gave a faint smile. "I had help." The commander's gaze shifted to Jack and Mason. "Humans," he said, almost like it was a question. Lyra stepped closer, her voice firm. "Not just humans, my team." Jack felt a strange warmth in his chest at the words. Mason just grinned. "Guess we're official now." They boarded the transport together. The crystal locked in a secure case between them. As the ship lifted off, Jack looked out at the shrinking plateau below, thinking of how close they'd come to not making it. Lyra sat beside him, quiet, but her hand brushed against his for just a second. Mason caught the gesture and smirked, but said nothing. Outside, the sky widened, the war still waiting beyond the horizon. But for now, they had done the impossible. Three people who should never have trusted each other had fought, bled, and won side by side, and somewhere deep inside, Jack knew whatever battles came next, 2 humans and 1 alien girl would face them together, because that's what real teamwork looked like.